Welcome to South Star Classroom, episode 175. I was over here jamming to that music. It kind of grew on me. At first, I was like, oh my, it sounds like heavy metal. It's like scratching. And now it's the tune of my heart. Well, welcome. I just want to start with check-ins. My favorite part of the show. How are you doing, Omar Yanar?
Oh, what up, Queen? How you doing? All is well, man. I just spent the weekend in what I would consider like my second home, San Francisco, and was there with some friends. Chinese New Year. It was really, really pretty. I was telling David that like they've cleaned up San Francisco a considerable amount since the last time I was there, like a considerable amount. It was actually reminiscent of the San Francisco of the late 90s and early 2000s. Didn't even see like a ton of tech bros, which was also really nice because we didn't have a lot of those back in the early 2000s, much to our happiness. So repping the city with the San Francisco shirt, San Francisco brand. So I spent the weekend in nature and seeing the coast and seeing waves and beautiful fat seals that were waddling and sunning on the water. So that was amazing. Dave, how are you doing, brother?
I am doing well. We spent a little time this weekend out in nature.
Groove.
About a 30-minute drive to like a local area here, a local reservoir. And it's fascinating, man. It's just like 30 minutes and you're like deep in mountain territory. Hiked around a little bit, found a hidden, like literally a swimming hole, right? Where water was like flowing into it, like a little waterfall. And this, not a little one, it was actually a big swimming hole. Kind of like, wow, look at that. Like in the old days when you'd be just wandering and you find something like that. So that was good. And it also, it also reminded me of the, we've been back in San Diego about 3 years, and I have a new awareness now compared to like when I was a younger lad. Just wanting to learn more and explore more of the history of this land, and the Kumeyaay tribe were the predominant Native American group in this area. And just so, when you get out in nature, you kind of have these moments where you're looking around and you're like, yeah, this is like native land, native soil, Kumeyaay soil. So that was kind of part of the reflection as well.
Beautiful. I feel so calm just listening to that. So thank you for sharing. I am doing wonderfully. On Sunday, I went to a dance party like I was in college. Unintentionally. And when I say to DJ, David, let me tell you something. Omar, we would have got a good two-step in. This DJ was amazing, right? So, I'm pretty new to this area, but house music. It was like a infusion of pop with house music, underneath, and it was just amazing. And I danced all the way until I needed probably a whole bag of Epsom salt. But that is another topic. But it made me think. It was like, how are we going to make it through these next 4 years? We know by the grace of God, we'll make it through. But I was like, oh, I know. This is how we'll make it through creative expression, through dancing, through joy, through life, through camaraderie, to connectivity. Like we've got what it takes. We are a resilient people.
Yeah.
And embedded within us, within our culture, our community, even flowing through our veins, is all the tools that we need to be able to make it through to the next 4 years.
Yep.
So,
not to go on a tangent, but you mentioned house music, and I'm like, we could do a whole show on the origins of house music, because now when we hear like house music, it's obviously very commercialized now, but house music was created in Chicago in the 1980s.
Wow.
by mainly African Americans. Producers that kind of made the switch from disco into like, taking disco and taking it to the next level, which became house music. It was actually born out of a particular club called the Warehouse in Chicago, and it was the residency of the famous R.I.P. Frankie Knuckles was the DJ and the producer at this club. It's called the Warehouse, and that's where we get house music from. So there's a whole like rich history of not just African American, but like Puerto Rican, Latino history. A lot of gay history, gay culture. Most of the clubs were not just gay friendly, but they were just straight. They were like gay clubs, and so yeah. Anyways,
Listen. I love it. I'm here for it. Yeah, maybe we'll intend how we will survive.
Good idea. Yeah, man. Or like the creative outlet of education.
Absolutely.
And not just the fact that we talk about like literacy and math, but the like deep necessity for self-actualization, creativity, and imagination. And like we can do a whole show on music and art and house. And I love it. Let's do it. Let's have a kid up with today's show.
Yeah, listen, I'm here for it. Before we dive in, I'd like to introduce our special guest, Miss Amber Green. For those of you who don't know her, Omar, you had a few months back. Ms. Green is a former Biden-Harris administration official with an impressive background in advancing racial and economic justice. She served in the White House Domestic Policy Council and at the U.S. Department of State, where she played a key role in promoting equity and human rights for marginalized communities. Her work has spanned directing policies that address systemic inequities, supporting underserved communities, and championing initiatives in education and public policy. So we're honored to have her expertise here with us today. Amber Green, welcome to the South.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I'll allow her to check in real quick. How you doing? This is listen.
Fancy.
We went to college together. We went to undergrad together at SUNY New Falls.
SUNY.
Yes, and then we also danced on a dance troupe together.
We did.
So she was Aaliyah. I always say this is a whole nother inside joke that just can't stay inside. She played Aaliyah in this big production. It was amazing because the girl could dance. And then she left New Falls and went on to Princeton to get her MA in, what was it, Amber?
Public policy.
Public policy. So welcome to the South Star Classroom.
Thank you. Doing? I'm so grateful to be here and in such good company. I was loving to hear the history of house music. I had no idea about that background. So it's always good to learn something new. And I just appreciate the opportunity to share and be in conversation with you, especially Jubilee, who is not only a classmate, but a friend, but I just admire all the work that you are doing, balancing a whole lot and keeping things moving. So just glad to be here. And this weekend I was hanging out in Albany at the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus. With some legislators and just trying to figure out where we go next step. So it was a good experience.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, welcome. All right. So today's topic is authenticity versus assimilation, the debate over code switching. Oh my God. So we're going to be exploring a few points, but I just want to lay some groundwork before we jump into our conversation. Okay. And so I'll start with just defining code switching and then the difference between slang, because I thought that might be a little point of we need a point of clarification there. So while both code switching and slang are related, both have distinct linguistic phenomena, right? They involve altering language depending on the situation, but code switching refers to the practice of switching between entirely different languages or distinct dialects within a language, depending on the context. While slang refers to the use of informal words or phrases specific to a particular group. Both are used, well, slang is more so used to create a sense of belonging within that group. Essentially, code switching involves changing the overall language used, while slang focuses on specific words within a language to convey a certain social meaning. So that is the difference between code switching and slang. For the purpose of today's conversation, we're talking about code switching. And just a little on the history of code switching. Code switching has been known to be a survival tool for Black and Brown communities, used to navigate white-dominated spaces while preserving cultural identity. During segregation and the civil rights movement, code switching allowed Black professionals and activists to communicate effectively across racial lines while maintaining solidarity with their own communities. Another small piece, the rise of hip hop, social media, and Black cultural movements has brought more visibility to the AAVE, which is African American Vernacular English, and other linguistic forms, challenging the idea that professionalism must align with white linguistic norms. And last point around the history of code switching, modern shifts in workplace culture and DEI initiatives, which has now become a curse word, sadly, have encouraged more inclusive language policies. Though with the recent DEI rollbacks, some worry about renewed pressure to conform, right? And then lastly, so we've got definitions, slang versus code switching. We've got a little bit of history, and now it's just some types where we might see code switching show up. We've got workplace communication, right? Somebody switching at work, accent and dialect shifts. A person, for example, who has a Southern accent may soften their accent or neutralize it when they're speaking in professional settings, but then revert back to their natural accent. For a Black employee may use African American vernacular English when speaking with Black colleagues, but switch to standard English when interacting with white coworkers to fit into the dominant culture. Right, multilingual, right? For our Spanish brothers and sisters, Spanish speaking brothers and sisters, they might speak Spanish at home, but switch to English at work to align with workplace norms. We have LGBTQ code switch. A gay employee may adjust their voice or avoid discussing their personal life in a workplace setting to avoid discrimination. Avoiding stereotypes. A young Black student might change their tone or avoid slang in a classroom setting to counter stereotypes about intelligence or professionalism. Cultural adaptation. A first-generation immigrant might dress in a Western-style business attire at work, but wear traditional cultural clothing at home or in their community. And lastly, professional versus informal language. A person may use formal language and industry jargon in a job interview, but use casual language when texting friends. So these are examples of how code switching is a survival strategy for many people, especially those from marginalized backgrounds. But it can also create challenges related to identity and authenticity. And so I'll stop there and ask you for your initial reactions to today's topic, authenticity versus assimilation, the debate over code switching.
Yeah, it's a tough topic, and I will say, you wish you had, especially growing up, that you had more of an awareness of what code switching was and just not to do it. I think that's the thing that as you become an adult and as you become more confident in yourself, you become more accepting of the whole you, right? And you feel like you can show up in the spaces that you're supposed to be in. And that's really what a lot of the work around diversity, equity, inclusion is so that people can bring their whole selves and not feel like they have to hide a part of themselves or cower in a different way just to feel accepted. And, a lot of this is rooted in, survival. You think about Jim Crow era and segregation where people had to change their language and identity just to be able to feel safe. But you also had a revival within the Harlem Renaissance and in the 60s and 70s, Chicanos, and like the community there to be able to really have your language, culture, and identity be a reflection and an expression of self-worth. And I think that's where we see just a lot of the differences in terms of when you are taught to hide your culture or hide your full identity. Being in a society where you may not always be accepted. And it really has to do with survival, just trying to fit in. And that's not right. Being in those spaces and places that you have earned a right to be in, you should be able to come to work and school as your full self and not have to change your language or change your dialect. But that isn't the unfortunate reality that many of us have grown up in. I want to say, and I hope younger people will also contribute to this discussion, that they feel more comfortable being themselves. And I know we talked a little bit in the opening just about music and culture. Music and culture has had a huge, huge impact on the way that particularly African American culture, Latino culture is viewed around the world, how it is emulated around the world. And so that I think has helped to reduce some of the barriers that maybe we have had experienced growing up, where we didn't see the visibility on TV. We didn't hear or see families that were recognized like we did, or even read stories that were told. So I'm hopeful that things have progressed, but people still have to come out more than once, right? I had a coworker who had told me, I came out to my parents and my family, but then each time I go to a job, I have to come out again. And so those are things that you don't necessarily realize that people are experiencing and going through because they cannot go to work as their full selves, or they may feel ostracized or be treated differently. And that's really what all this comes down to, is that people not wanting to be treated differently. And unfortunately, that is what happens if you are the quote unquote, minority individual in terms of population, not minority of self, but just minority in terms of numbers. But you don't have that luxury. And you always have to constantly explain like who you are and what you do and why you may say a word like this, or, just ways that you use your language, and doesn't necessarily make it wrong. And I think that's the thing that we have to understand, that yes, there is workplace culture and workplace language, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't bring your personal self and your culture to the workplace, because that's what makes our country better. Diversity is one of our nation's greatest strengths.
I love it. Thank you, Amber. What you got, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've kind of laid out is the experience I had growing up, where I've talked about it before on the show, going to my transition from high school into college, and I ended up attending a university that was there were very few people of color, mainly, like, when I say people of color, I'm talking about African Americans and Latinos. And the culture shock that I experienced was incredibly intense. Not just the culture shock, but like the volume of the work and the readings and all that stuff. But having to really survive and learn how to negotiate through dialogue, not just with professors, but with my peers and other people on the campus, was probably, I probably, we should all receive a separate degree for having survived those experiences. It's not anywhere on our
Surviving middle school, y'all.
And so, I mean, it reminds me of that, but at the same time, so learning how to code switch, right? When was the right time? When was the wrong time? Having to explain yourself, having people say wow, you're a first generation college student. Your parents are farm workers, but you're so articulate.
Yeah.
Not articulate. Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy.
I got that one.
We all got that,
but you're one of the
piece.
good ones.
You're right.
Then you get it from the other side too. Because I didn't live on campus. I lived in San Diego in a neighborhood that I grew up in, and I grew up in and around Latinos and African Americans and Asians, and I grew up in and around gang life, and so now I'm taking the bus to the University of California at San Diego it was like a time warp, and you end up in a different planet, and then I go back and you get ostracized by my by my homies, because now I'm like the college kid, right?
Yep.
Who maybe is now talking a little bit different and talking about different things. Doesn't want to get blasted every night, and it's like, you changed, man. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm trying to change. I'm trying to become a better person, So I mean, that whole thing translates into that experience, but then also my first series of jobs in the corporate world, my jobs in education, being a school leader, being a systems leader, all of it, it's even to this day. And it's if I had, and I think Amber's right, the fact that our culture now, we see so much more of Black culture, of Latino culture through media, through music. But back then it was no, there was a huge gap. So that's my initial thoughts. And then maybe when we get into it, we can talk about the vernacular, you're talking about African-American vernacular English. We also have the vernacular known as Calo, which is a Mexican-American Chicano vernacular that still exists today. We still use the words. So yeah, there's all these different things of standard English, home language, what's slang, what's not, what's in between, what's code switching. I think it's a fascinating conversation.
Oye, vato?
I love it.
Simone Way.
I love it, man. Yeah, I love it. I love this conversation. Amber, I thought you did such a good job of contextualizing not just what it is, but how one feels. And David, I thought you really hit it home, at least for me, in like the Mexican context of like, damn, dude, we're ostracized from two different realities. And I don't know how much of our audience feels that way. It's like you're just kind of in this weird middle ground. So, I think back to my mom, who came in, Mexican immigrant from Sonora, speaking only Spanish, and just got to elementary school, and all the little white girls were like, you speak dirty and you're dirty and you shouldn't be here and you should go back to where you came from. And these are like children, right? So like when you hear children who aren't, as Carl Jung would say, with the like blank moral compass, right? Or not the blank moral compass, but a moral compass of understanding right and wrong. Like this is where like Nietzsche comes in. It's like, that's taught behavior. Who's teaching these kids in society that there's a right way and a wrong way, quote unquote, right? And mom really felt the wrath of this and was thinking to herself, okay, I better learn English quite quickly, and I need to eradicate my accent. What's really fascinating is how that perpetuated itself in Soraya and I. Soraya is my sister. So how does Omar normally speak? Like I'm speaking right now. This is the accent. And people are like, what in the world is that accent? And I think it came from mom, who created an interesting accent in eradication of whatever Mexican American accent that one comes. Because people in El Paso, bro, we talk a bit more like this, eh? It's a bit more singy songy. And when I get around my uncles, hey, sometimes you talk like this. And that is an example of code switching, where one has to change not just the intonation of their voice and the words, it's used as a mechanism to create comfort, because this is familiar to me. And that I always found to be particularly interesting, because you talk about it with such few people, right? You get around a couple of Mexican Americans at Stanford, and like we bonded over the 4 movies that we had. David, you remember La Bamba, Blood In, Blood Out, right? I get around Black friends and we bonded, over like House Party, and if they really knew their stuff, like Superfly and the Mac, and it was just like, here's a culture that we both understand, and now we feel better about ourselves because we know something about culture and life and dialogue and switching and integration and dealing with a very scared, very intimidated white culture. Both scared because they were unfamiliar with it, and scared that we were going to eradicate it versus integrate with it. And thus the idea of assimilation, which is something my mom taught me about when I was very young, which is the overriding ideology in this country. And I'll make my last point here, simply because we have a good friend on the show. His name is Alonso. He was my student at Coronado, brilliant student. And he and I bonded quickly because, he told me, bro, everyone just thinks I'm some cholo. Everyone looked at me and the way I looked and the way I dressed and treated me like I was inferior, treated me like I was dumb, treated me as if I was going to get in trouble. And therein lies, like, people are like, why do you have to code switch? What a perfect example, because he didn't do shit except exist. And this is how people treated him. And we bonded because, like, I saw a young man, I was like, damn, dude, this kid's smart as all living hell. And he's like, oh, someone finally sees me for who I am. Someone finally looks through all of these stereotypes and interprets me as a human. Like, hey, maybe that's where we should progress as a society. And I'm wondering, like, it always makes me kind of think of like, when did we start doing this? No one taught us to do this. We just sort of picked it up.
Yeah.
Right. And it got to the point that we've invented a word for it. So I'm really excited to hear from you all, because those are kinds of the questions that are still swimming around in my head right now.
Thank you. So I love so much of what you said, and it's a perfect segue. Before we go into talking more about code switching and identity, I just want to acknowledge our friends in the chat. You acknowledge Alonzo, hey, and Toya, and Nicole put a comment up here. She said,
Mama Toya, we love you.
hey, Toya. So, and I'm going to go back to Toya stuff too, but Nicole said, I'm proudly hood and bougie. I'm Hadouji. Now, let me tell you, this is
dope.
good. Nicole, this is good because I never heard Hadouji before. And so now the next time me and Amber go out, that's what we're going to use when we go out. We're going to call each other. Maybe we get hoodies or something.
Hadouji. I love that. I love that.
But that also ties into the identity. And I love what you said, Omar. I'm coming back to that. But Toya said, these spaces are damn exhausting. And this comment right here about remembering, about going natural. I mean, that may not be a linguistic change, but for a Black woman, a Black man that doesn't naturally have straight hair, and having to add heat and get all of these approved white styles, because braids are unprofessional, twists are unprofessional, and afro is unprofessional. And it's like, no, this is just how my hair grows. You would, if a white person let their hair grow out, you wouldn't say that's unprofessional. But because mine grows out curly, kinky, you know, it's unprofessional. So
nobody cares when Riff Raff gets cornrows, right?
Nobody when they appropriate. Oh God, please. So that really struck a nerve, indeed. And then Omar, the reason why I loved one of your questions is you said, when do we start doing this? When do we learn this? And that's what I was thinking, that it's like you don't necessarily get taught this stuff. Like grandma doesn't necessarily sit you down and be like, this is called code switching. Like when the white people come in, say this, but you just pick it up because you see other people who are going before you or in your environment. That's what they're doing, you know? And so you learn to follow suit. Like, oh, we only speak like that when we're in this small group, but when they're here, we don't speak like that, you know? And so we learn it that way. So, yes, Toya said they created a damn law in the Crown Act. So I want to put out our first question as Meadow begins to bang something around like she does every single time. And it's connected to code switching and identity. So we're furthering the conversation. Is code switching a form of assimilation? And we've talked about this, right? Melting pot versus the salad bowl, right? But this nation has really pushed the melting pot, right? Where everybody loses their identity and takes on the form of the dominant culture. So is it assimilation, or is it a strategic tool for navigating professional and social spaces? And Amber, to your earlier point where you talked about just this idea of acceptance, right? Now we done been here long enough to know we don't have that. We don't have that. This, right? You might get it in some pockets, but not in a way that is restorative, revolutionary, right? We don't have that. So given that, where does code switching and identity fall? Is it assimilation? Is it a strategic tool for navigating professional and social spaces?
Well, thank you. I think it can be both. And I think it can actually be a third, which is preservation of our culture and our identity. You all shared a lot about just the familiarity and also the commonality that you share, and you feel that bond. And I think that is a good thing when it comes to the preservation of our cultures. We think of also indigenous culture, indigenous peoples around the world that are losing their language, their heritage due to global influences and climate change and all of those things. And they are often, forced to the ultimate assimilation of just culture and erasure of identity. Here on the U.S. side, it's sort of both. Like I think in some places it is forced assimilation. We think of Native Americans that were placed in boarding schools to remove their identity and their culture. But we also see on the other side where some cultures have identified assimilation as a way of tools and advancement. I think of a lot of my Asian American friends who have an Asian name and also have an American name so that they can try to, still fit in those spaces. And those things are not fair. These are not things that anybody should have to do. Again, this goes back to why diversity is important, why diversity of thought and all people really matters in those spaces. But as a tool, it also can be helpful when you're navigating professional and social spaces, because not everybody is thinking the same way in terms of thinking that diversity is a plus for us. So it's sort of this mix of, when to do it, when not to do it. I know I've been guilty of it. I know sometimes I'm even guilty of it now, even as an adult. It just happens to be the way that I was brought up. I was, African American, living in the Bronx, but I grew up in a white neighborhood. Then I went to middle school and I went to a predominantly black neighborhood school. So I was like listening to Madonna and like listening to Salt and Pepper as
Like
a
a
whole.
virgin.
Exactly. High school was amazing. High school was like what America should be. And I went to the LaGuardia High School, a famed school. So it was all arts. And again, I think that's the power of why art and music and culture and heritage is so critical to this conversation, because it allows for those barriers to be broken down. So it can be a tool that can be helpful, but it also, you just have to be mindful of when you have to navigate those spaces. And that's just the honest fact of it. There are some people, and I totally admire a lot of people that are just able to go into spaces and be their authentic selves. But that happens when you were raised to fully accept who you are, what you look like, how you speak. But not everybody has that luxury. Again, it goes back to the treatment, I think, early on of how we learn things. Someone put in the chat in grade school. Again, I was one of the only African American families at my school. I was treated very differently. They used to have braids. They used to call me Medusa, like all types of things. Because now I braid straight hair, whatever we want to do, we do to our hair as Black women, which is a lot of fun.
Indeed.
But it is unfortunate that sometimes those things are forced, and that is where we have to really instill in young people to honor themselves and honor their identity, make sure that they feel comfortable, make sure that they are not treated differently just because of their outward appearance or the way that they speak. And that requires all of us to even be a bystander, even if you are not a member of a particular community, speaking up and saying when things are done that can be harmful to people's upbringing. So if you see someone that's being teased because they have an accent, we all have a duty to speak that. I wish that I spoke more than one language. Okay, because I'd be back and forth and probably cussing people out in different languages. But all of these things are again, they are social constructs. These are made up. These are things that we can ultimately erase if we put the effort into making sure that we have truly, truly inclusive societies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in? Assimilation or strategic tool? We have some comments in the chat from Julio Cotto. That was really insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, Julio's dropping some bombs in the chat here.
Yeah.
I think just to be very quick, I think it's a combination of the two. I think and this goes back to Toya's earlier comment about how exhausting it can be, because your brain is constantly having to like kind of forecast or predict the kind of context that you're going to be in. And so given this particular context, whether it be in a professional setting, a non-professional, whatever, you have to like adjust, right? I mean, and that's just what happens. I think so I think it's a combination of the two. I'm not a big believer. I mean, I don't support the assimilation kind of theory. And so, I believe that we are stronger, definitely, through our, I mean, this sounds like very corny and cheesy, but we are stronger communities, stronger country when we honor, our own unique backgrounds and heritage. I think it makes us better people. And so, there's that. And I think we can definitely like go off on I think the Latino question here is fascinating, just around, I mean, you have this situation where, it's like the other side of it is, I was born here. My parents were born here. My the border crossed my family. We didn't cross the border. My family lived in South Texas before 1848. And after 1848, it became part of the state of Texas, right?
Wow.
And so over the years, we've lost our ability to like speak proficient Spanish. Still can. It's not perfect. But then you get the criticism of like, you're like you're a güero, or you're like, you're not a real Latino, you're not a real Mexicano, Americano, you don't speak Spanish like that. And then there's even like within the ability to speak Spanish, there are particular dialects of and mannerisms within Spanish, whether you be from southern Mexico, northwestern Mexico, northeastern Mexico, Mexico City. It's fascinating. I agree with you. I think language is definitely a social part of it is a social construct, but you know part of that social construct is very deeply ingrained and embedded in who we are. So
Thank you for that. Nicole
It's
said Ebonics is a language or a dialect. Either way, I'm pop off, Nicole. I
straight up.
love it. Omar, you want to weigh in before we shift to DEI
Yeah,
role?
I,
Yeah.
I think it's confusing. So I'm working through confusion just as I speak, because on one end, I think about authenticity, and I think about being our authentic selves, and that authenticity is oftentimes confusing and offsetting to others. So, we're in a very trigger happy society these days. Everything triggers. I push back on that a lot. I don't believe in racism or horrible language, but we have glorified oversensitivity. Um, and getting into that, I think white people did that first. So oversensitive about being too loud, so oversensitive about using words in Spanish, so oversensitive. And, you know, like, bro, your lack of understanding and appreciation is what forced so many of us to code switch so that we could communicate effectively. So, when we talk about assimilation, I don't like it and I enjoy the authenticity of it. But here's the reality. I think that we haven't gotten to a critical point of enlightened citizenry in this country and this world. And I think about the things that people use as division and judgment. This is a judgmental place. This is a place that enjoys division, whether it be a football team, people burning down cities because their football team won or lost. Like, that is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. And that is the most rudimentary level of division. Now imagine something like race and language overpowering something like a sports team. So as judgment and division oftentimes disrupt being able to get to know somebody, while I'm absolutely for authenticity, David brought it up really well, is like communication is a social component. And is this communication landing and being effective? Because communication that lands and effective often puts people into a place of comfort versus a place of discomfort. Pinchy birds, man. Look, one of my best friends is from Philly. Like you, I'm happy that you all
2 weeks
didn't burn
later.
down Philadelphia. I texted my boy and I was like, "Hey, man, like, did you burn that John down?" Speaking of code switching, and he's like, "No, we're all right." So I think I'm still working through
Yeah.
confusion, because I think where I lie on is that it has become a tool of assimilation, but that stems into different communities, like Julio was saying. Like, if I don't tone down my language, or maybe speak a little slower, or start throwing in a couple words, like, all of a sudden my community starts looking at me and being like, bro, you're whitewashed, you're
Oh
a
yeah.
yeah.
sellout, I'm
Cooking
not
with.
going to listen to you anymore.
Yep.
And yet when I start switching with them, communication starts flowing a lot
Yeah.
more and commonality occurs. So I got to tell you, I'm working through things as
Yeah.
we speak.
I mean, I love it. Amber talked about preservation, and I'm thinking about that, but I'm also thinking about, like, there's certain things we just did to be seen. Like,
Yeah,
I
man.
I exist, and you said, Omar, you said, you know what, I'm going to speak like this, right, so I can communicate effectively, and I'd add to that. Um, I don't even know if I'd say effectively. I'd say just so you can understand me. I'm communicating with you in a way that you can understand. Because when I talk to my people, they understand what I'm trying to say, but you don't understand, and you don't have the flexibility, right? And the agility and the willingness to meet me where I am to understand me, right? And you're in a dominant
The
position.
whole Super Bowl halftime show.
I'm just saying you
Some
don't
of us
have it.
understood.
Like, you are not willing to be flexible because I'm not like you. Right. It's very out there that I'm not like you, that we are not the same, and you are in a power position, right? You're in the dominant. And so what you say goes. So I have to walk towards you and meet you where you are and communicate in a way that you can understand, because I already communicate effectively. The lie is that y'all went and said you're not articulate. That's why it's supposed to be a compliment when somebody tells a Black or brown person that they are articulate, which is also why so many people were upset when whatever that interviewer was told Obama that he was articulate. It's like, you think, look, like that's not a compliment, right? But because you don't think that we are articulate, because you think that there's something wrong with the way that we speak, present ourselves, our hair, our clothes, our culture, right? We have to come to where you are and speak in a way that you can understand, because within our people, we are understood, and we're actually understood with less words. So that's my thought on that. So it's preservation. I don't know. I'm still thinking through assimilation, Omar, because I think I'm allergic to assimilation. But just in thinking of being seen as people, because I know that you won't give me the time of day unless I meet you where you are and speak to you in a way that you can understand. Because
Man.
You won't learn to listen.
Assimilation's a bad word in this household.
Yeah. So those are my thoughts on that. So I want to transition. Thanks for weighing in on that. We're at 45. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
This went quick.
So we're gonna do a double whammy here. So this is like a two-part question, and this is gonna be the impact of DEI rollbacks. DEI rollback. So it's two questions, right? With the DEI initiatives being challenged or reversed in some workplaces and schools, I think it's changed from some to like all now, given it's illegal. I don't know if y'all saw the most recent letter that went out from the acting assistant secretary of education to all K-12 institutions. He sent it out on February 14th. I don't remember his name, but it's pretty terrible. Anyhow, does this make it was terrible? Okay. I was drinking a peach mimosa and wanted to just cry because I'm like, he used words like deplorable, right? Seeing DEI next to words like deplorable and illegal is heartbreaking. Anyhow, that's another show. But anyway, in light of all this, does this make code switching more necessary or less necessary? That's like A. And then B is how do Black and brown professionals and students navigate spaces where inclusion efforts are being undermined? Right. So and I'll let you think about it a bit.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
So the first, may I?
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
please. You're the guest.
Thank you. Well, just thank you though. So the first thing I would just say is that it is important to, just as a matter of just as we move forward, say what it is: diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI, unfortunately, has been put as in this acronym that is so freely just used as a throwaway term.
Love that.
And the communications, guidance that I was, reading up on, and it was really important. And the person that put this together said, when people say this, ask them what part of it you don't like diversity, you don't like equity, you don't like inclusion. Like, if you're going to say it, tell me exactly what you don't like about that. So you put that back. We have to think more strategically about flipping back that narrative. Is it that you don't want a diverse society? You want it to be homogenous? You don't like equity and fairness for people, everyone, and you don't like the inclusion. So everybody shouldn't be able to come to themselves. So I just want to say that as just a point of reference. Whenever we can talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, let us all say diversity, equity, inclusion, so people can be very specific about what it is that they disagree with. And one other thing, and now I'm about to say it. Diversity, equity, inclusion is not illegal. The Harvard and SFFA case only was specific to college admissions. What this administration is doing is putting things out of context. And that letter, I believe that the acting education secretary put forth, I think will be challenging, because on the merits of it, it also says that even if you're using quote unquote race neutral means to achieve diversity, you can't. So that's like That's not what SFFA ruled at all. Excuse me, that's not what the Supreme Court ruled in the SFFA. So as a matter of that, I think there will be several challenges. And it actually might empower more parents and educators to understand that possibly their civil rights protections may be actually harmed as a result of removing education curriculum, not letting children be able to express themselves or their heritage. So I think that our lawyers will be very busy for the next couple of years as these court cases move forward. And I just want to encourage everybody to educate themselves about the Civil Rights Act, educate themselves specifically about what the Department of Education is responsible for doing under the Civil Rights Act, including their state departments of education, because you do have rights. And just the same way that people can say that they hypothetically have been harmed by learning about the history of brutalized chattel slavery, you can also talk about the fact that everyone needs to learn about their history so that we truly understand where we came from. So that's just a side point. But it just in terms of the rollbacks, and does that leave us more focused on like people not being able to truly express themselves? I think it might actually have a flip side to it, where people may be more inclined to actually go a little bit further on learning about their own history and culture, being able to talk to other people about things, having more discussions outside of the classroom, which is totally fine to do. Some of our best learnings and opportunities don't necessarily always happen within the confines of the school day. They happen in our communities. So I'm hoping that there will be a resurgence of people really learning about the history of what diversity, equity, inclusion was supposed to focus on, specifically when it comes to the importance and protections and preservations of our civil rights as Americans. So that's what I'm hopeful of. Now, does that mean that I guess what I want to say is that we can't be lazy. So we can't just think that we're only going to get our education on these issues in the classroom. There are tons of projects, universities, community-based organizations, your houses of worship. There are tons of ways to continue to learn about our history and culture and the importance of the preservation of diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives writ large. So I see it as a way that I hope that people will be more empowered. Yes, it may be harder to understand and learn about these topics in structuralized settings because people may be afraid of potential lawsuits. But the same way as, again, as I started this conversation, we all need to educate ourselves about our civil rights and the things that we do so that we can potentially launch those same lawsuits. Because I will bet you 95% of the things that we will launch are things that have actually caused harm. We have Supreme Court cases that are going up on the strength of just hypothetically being harmed. There has been no harm. People that have still received the most, unfortunately, still receive the most when it comes to resources and contracting, all of those things. Yes, other groups are moving up, but overall, the system is still imbalanced. So I really question when people say that they've been harmed by learning about a specific issue when it comes to anything related to race. So that's my 2 cents. I probably have a lot more to say, but I'll just keep it quiet.
Right. So we're whipping around and then we're going into final thoughts. So you can totally shoot when we get back to final thoughts. All right. Who else wants to weigh in? Yeah.
I mean, I'll be quick. Oh, go ahead, David. You're on mute, brother.
You're up, Omar.
I was just gonna say, look, man, like it's an attack. Like, let's call this what it is, and it's an attack, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion is a very simple ideology that everyone in this audience knows is like, look, man, when you have a boardroom filled with white dudes and they ain't gonna bring anybody except white dudes, or you've got a place of work that's filled with white dudes and they ain't gonna fill it with anything but people that they know, which is white dudes. Diversity, equity, inclusion is saying this is about hiring extraordinarily qualified people who don't look like you, who come from different cultures. So I saw Kid Rock, who is just a mouthpiece of like stupidity on Bill Maher recently. And this guy made his whole shtick of like, I'm an American, F this DEI shit, and I'm a moderate. And I'm like, you came in with this very like interestingly manipulative ideology of trying to connect with the audience that you're this everyman. And what you're doing is denigrating minorities, denigrating diversity, denigrating an audience that listens to your garbage. Dude, his music's fucking garbage anyways, dude. And this is the problem, because people are listening to a guy like Kid Rock and being convinced, well, this guy seems to speak logically, and we're going to denigrate the whole idea of diversity, equity, inclusion because Kid Rock makes some sense. And as Amber like eloquently said, we ain't going to call it DEI anymore, like diversity, equity, inclusion, man. So I'm following suit, because you ask any American, hey man, you for diversity, equity, and inclusion? Like the majority will be like, yeah, hell yeah. You say to the same person how you feel about DEI, they're like, oh, I don't like that. I ain't down with that. It is an attack that is purposely being used as a political talking point to keep up white supremacy and white superiority. And I ain't having that shit. And I'm with Nicole. We need to clap back. We need the workshops. We need
Yes,
to
Nicole.
dig in more.
Yeah.
When they decide to come at me, fuck that. I'm going real authentic. You ain't getting my code switching self. You're getting this motherfucker right here who
There
likes
he
to
is.
use real big words to be like, I ain't gonna be put in no corner, motherfucker. Like, I'll talk to you and help educate you as best as I can with love and understanding, but don't come attacking me and thinking that it's in the spirit of equity just because Kid Rock did it on Bill Maher. Is anyone going to cancel Kid Rock? Someone cancel that guy. You're out here canceling us for trying to create
Piss Omar off. Look, there we go.
And this like rat bastard out here with the worst music, someone cancel his ass, man. We don't want to hear from him anymore. Stop running for Senate in Michigan, man. Oh, 5 people that voted for you.
The 5 people that voted for you is hilarious. And you know, it's the same thing like everything. Same thing like with the border. It's fear mongering.
Yeah.
Mhm.
How this all started, right? Like, and to Amber's earlier point, like, what are the numbers saying? Are the numbers saying that all the blacks, it's the blacks, right? It's the Latinos coming across. It's the Mexicans. They're taking all of our jobs. They're taking all of our contracts. What are the numbers?
No, our jobs have been shipped overseas because we've privatized everything and don't value unions in this country. But that's a different
Correct.
show.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good show.
It
Come back
is.
for that one.
Yeah.
David, what you got? And then we'll whip around for
And the Venezuelans are eating all of our cats and dogs, right?
What cats and dogs?
It was the Haitians. Remember, they blamed the Haitians too.
The Asians, yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah, they're taking over. You know, I think just very quickly, I know we're up on time, but looking at Nicole's comment and then, you know, going back to what Amber had shared, like this idea, this concept of like, okay, now it's time to get organized, right? You know, forget about what happens in formal spaces. You know, we're talking about the home, we're talking about the community, we're talking about our history, right? So like given everything that's happening right now, which for the most part we don't have any control over, we need to focus on what we do have control over, and that means like empowering our families, our children, our communities, ourselves to like double down on efforts to really continue to understand like how we got here and what our individual histories are, and also like what are our shared histories, right? Where do our histories like intersect with one another? And so I think that piece really resonated with me, and gives me hope.
Love that. Let's whip around for final thoughts. And if you could couple your final thought, if you have something with advice for future generations. I think Amber touched upon this in the beginning. Like, what do we want to see happen in this area? And I'll go first, and then we'll end with Amber, and then I'll close
Yes,
us
please.
out. But diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, say the whole name, right? That's like my
Yeah.
takeaway. And then, advice for our generations that are coming up now is to Amber's earlier point, like, be your full self, be your full self. And who is supposed to understand you will. And I think that's the only way to resist, to provide some level of resistance against this. I think, of course, we got to use wisdom, because I think, hatred always shows its ugly head, rears its ugly head. So we got to use wisdom. But I think gone are the days when we need to subjugate our own selves, just for being alive and communicating and existing in a certain way. And so that is what I'd say. All right. Passing the baton to David.
All right. I like the idea of, when people say they don't like DEI, like to break it down, right? Turn it into a dialogue, and ask them, what particular components of it, are you opposed to, or what do you have questions about? I'm also thinking about like how, essentially all of these things kind of got wrapped up in this 2024 election, right, where Trump was elected. I've cited this number, but I'll cite it again here. Between various campaigns, there was about $215 million spent during the 2024 election cycle on anti-trans messaging, right? This trans thing became such a huge thing when in reality, it's like a nothing burger. There's nothing there, right? But you create the appearance of it, and so everybody's talking about trans, everybody's talking about DEI, the border. So all of these things. So I don't really have any advice for like, young people around like code switching. But I do think advice for young people and for parents and for educators, in the home or in school is just to like, again, listen to young people, listen to what they're saying. Don't try to correct them. Just like listen to what they're hearing, listen to their questions, right? And you go from there, because then you can kind of easily break down, a lot of the fear that people have, because so much of this stuff is just basically like inorganically created, to win an election, and they were successful. But in reality, like there's not much there. And I think with a little dialogue, you can kind of push through a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, going in a slightly different direction. I think, Jubilee, you said something that kind of resonated. I was watching like 42 recently, like, because HBO is doing all the Black movies and stuff, and I'm like, oh, I love these movies, and I'm like, man, you should have these out all the time. And there was a moment where someone was saying, look, Jackie, like there's a little white boy who was like rubbing his hands with dirt out on a baseball field because you did that. And it resonated with me because hip hop, Bad Bunny, these things are infusing the world finally, I think, we're out here and this is how we speak and this is how we do things. And I think kids are finally getting the concept of there is immense amount of diversity in the way that we speak, and we should be celebrating it and we should be understanding it versus relegating it. I still think that there is a very intentional group of people in this country who, by the way, were just out marching in Washington, D.C., like it was nothing, the white supremacist group, trying to ensure that that's suppressed from kids. And this is why you've got this like interesting curriculum showing up in places like Oklahoma, Texas, trying to subvert the diversity. And where I'm going with this is that kids are impressionable and kids want to feel themselves, and schools are helping in the assimilation and the eradication of diversity. So the only direction I would go in with this diversity, equity, and inclusion component is we should be celebrating and exposing our kids in our schools to diversity in a positive way that is going to make them feel like not only can they celebrate diversity, they can celebrate their diversity and their authenticity. And therein lies, I think, the panacea. It will, like David said, listen to the kids, not just listen to the kids, empower the kids, allow the kids to be themselves, allow them to speak in the way they're going to speak, and celebrate that speech and understand how to be able to, if we want to call it code switching, more to the tune of develop the ability to be your authentic self and communicate in a way that feels wonderful to you, so that the world can learn to adapt to the diversity versus the diversity trying to adapt to this world.
I totally agree with everything that that you all shared as well. I would just add just a couple things onto that. I was listening to a podcast with who was it? It was Gwendolyn Eiffel, former chair council of LDF, and she was saying, you know, it was a great podcast. I'll try to find it and send it, but it was like last year. But it had talked about the fact that most people are doing these things because they're responding to us, right? All of these things are responding to us, responding to the fact that people uh, are educating themselves and learning about other cultures and excelling economically or socially. So all of this is in response to people doing better, and people want to hold that progress back. But as I said many times in other conversations, when we start removing opportunity, when we start stripping opportunity from people, it makes our country weaker, stronger, not only economically, socially, and morally. And so I think when we think about the future of our country and where we are in this global standing of the world, these impacts of these next 4 years will make or break you know, how we move forward. But I would just say, just lastly, I have hope, because I have hope for young people. I think they, even aside from their own language, like we haven't even talked about their code switching language, which is all in text and other things. They have an entire different way of communicating.
Yeah, man, good point.
And that is shared globally. And so that's what I think is something that is a plus for us, because a lot more young people are exposed to cultures globally and in a fast way, right? Things happen quickly over social media, and that unites us. And if we can just understand that there are more of us, not only more people of color, but just more people that want to see everybody included, than there are the small minority of a powerful minority, but that we are not powerless. And I think that's something that we all have to remember, is that we are not powerless in this moment. We have every tool that we can. We need everybody to speak up. We need white folks to speak up and not be afraid as well. And so everybody in this moment has to be able to say enough is enough. We want a country that works for everybody. We are tired of fighting the same battles. Like, this is exhausting, and it just takes away.
It is.
It takes away from what we could be as a nation. You know, if America is going to be this strong nation and light for the rest of the world to strive towards when it comes to democratic values, these things dilute that. So I am hopeful that more people will speak up, that they realize that they're not powerless, and that they also realize that all of this stuff is in response, because it is working and it has to continue to work. So that's my point of, I know we went a little bit around code switching, but I think what everybody's saying is that we just have to make sure that everybody is able to be their authentic self. That's when we trust people. That's when people come and talk to us about different things, if they can come authentically, that's the most important thing. But I have hope for young people. I feel like they're going to be all right. And they also are very creative and are creating new businesses and new opportunities and new spaces each and every day. We have to support the things that are working in our communities. And I think this is also a great moment where we will see an infusion of dollars supporting Black and brown businesses, Asian American businesses as well, because we realize we're going to spend our dollars where we are valued, and we're going to invest in places that value us and value our goals. So that's a good thing about social media. That's a good thing about having an opportunity to communicate on platforms like this, because the information gets out there quickly and we can share it and educate the next person. So thank you.
I love that. We have another optimistic queen last week.
Love it.
We love it. I'm inspired by all of you and what you have shared. I'm inspired by all of the comments and the engagement in the chat. To all of our viewers, I am Jubilee. That's Amber. That's David. That is Omar Yanar, and we are the South Star Classroom. Join us next week, same time, same place. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Peace. Thank you, Amber.
Thank you, everybody.
Let's see.
Great job, Amber. Awesome. Wow.
Today's episode of BS3 Network is brought to you by McDonald's. McDonald's is going to McDonald's and creating a universe for longtime fans of both McDonald's and anime. I love sauce on my McNuggets and can't wait to try the savory chili McDonald's sauce. It's savory, chili, and bold. For decades, across various episodes and genres, McDonald's has shown up in the anime world and most commonly called WickDonald's. McDonald's will be bringing the WickDonald's world to life with episodic shorts and manga comics. For a limited time, anime fans will have the opportunity to experience their favorite fictional restaurant. You have until March 25th to try the new savory chili McDonald's sauce with your 10-piece chicken nuggets.